The oil and gas industry has been dominated by particular methods and approaches to defining and addressing problems, accomplished by gathering and analyzing the corresponding forms of evidence. Going beyond these analytic conventions, we welcome the broad concepts of stories and narratives. Through this initiative, we approach the intersection of nature, humanity, and technology in multiple ways, using storytelling as a way of understanding, communicating, and influencing others. Hello and welcome. I'm Garima, and joining me on the dais today is Mr. Jim Crompton, Professor of Practice in the Petroleum Engineering Department at Colorado School of Mines and the Managing Director at Reflections Data Consulting. Thank you so much for joining us today, sir.
Thank you for the invitation. I look forward to the conversation.
Absolutely, sir. So let's begin with your motivation behind joining the oil and gas industry. What inspired you?
Well, it was, first of all, it was a long time ago. I think I've been in the industry now 44 years. So if you go back to my academic days, I actually went to the Colorado School of Mines as well. So I'm an alumni and a faculty if you go to that.
Wonderful.
Out of high school, I was good at math and science. So I enjoyed all of that, particularly physics, the rest of that. But living in Colorado with beautiful mountains nearby and tremendous geology, I was always attracted by that. So when I went to university and everyone asked what was my major, that was something I had to put down on a form. I saw this term geophysics, and I had no idea what it was, but it had geology and physics in it. So I said, that sounds interesting. Let me try that. And I didn't have a course in the geophysics until I was a sophomore, second year. But then I just really got to learn to love it. That's the passion part, I guess. But originally, I was headed towards earthquake seismology. I was an earthquake guy. And that and understanding the subsurface and the bigger pictures of the basin forces was really fascinating. But then as I was getting ready to graduate, and I got my master's degree as well, so I was there for 6 years. It was the pretty hard economic fact that the oil and gas industry paid more money than the research organizations that studied earthquakes.
Right.
And it was my passion for the geology, physics, and then the economic benefit. And then I spent 37 years at Chevron. So I had a very profitable career. I was very happy in the choice that they ended up making, but it was never one thing. Even within Chevron, I ended up kind of in maybe 3 completely different areas.
Sir, and 44 years with the industry, if you had to name one thing about this industrial landscape that fascinates you the most, that interests you the most, what would that be?
Well, I kind of I guess I have both an engineering mindset, meaning I like to solve problems, and a science mindset, but I like to understand, what the basics of new problems. But if you force me to give you just one thing, it was early in my career when they drilled an oil and gas exploratory discovery well off of my work, one of my first maps, and this was in southwest Wyoming. That probably was as big a thrill to put the whole story together. You talk about storytelling, and I really like that theme. But sometimes you put a story together with verbal. Sometimes you put a story together with a map, or an analytical visualization or something like that. You have to be able to communicate your results, and that's a story.
Sure.
Engineers frequently aren't very good at this because they love to say how they did something, not what the answer was.
Right.
So they like to take you through every step, but your audience is really interested in the results. So in my case, to be able to put all of the data together, into a proposed map and a drilling location and have it be a discovery. That was about as good as it got.
Wonderful, wonderful, sir. And sir, talking about analytical visualization and data, how do you look at big data and its role in the oil and gas industry?
Well, again, I'm going to refer back to what I teach in my class several times. I teach a class in petroleum data analytics within the Petroleum Engineering Department. We've done it 3 years now. And actually, one of my lectures is how to tell a story with data. And big data to me is three things. It's more than just lots of data, the data volume kind of piece of that. We've been doing that for decades. That's really not new, and that's not a big data to me. Big data is the variety of data that you bring in when you look at the whole part of the problem.
Right.
So it's not just exploration, getting more data around their problem. It's exploration plus drilling plus completions plus production plus reservoir plus the infrastructure economic side of it. The variety of data is what to me is the bigger challenge around integrating all of this into a story over the holistic view of the life cycle of the oil field. And then I guess the last V in the big data definition that I use is velocity. And we are able to bring data from the field to maybe a corporate decision support center, and we could visualize things just a few minutes after they really happened, and make quicker, better decisions from all the rest of this. So it's the speed, it is the size,
Right.
and it is the variety of information to me it's a challenge for processing, it's a challenge for data management, and it's a real challenge for visualization, because you have a lot more things parts of your story. You're not telling a short story, you're
Right.
telling a novel worth of information.
Yes.
But still you have to condense it into a short story for your audience to be effective.
Absolutely, sir. And sir, if we talk about business models, the evolving business models in the industry, and how big data is fundamentally supporting these emerging business model in the industry, how would you comment on that?
Well, I think, when you talk business model, that's very important. The petroleum engineers are used to just being challenged to say, the story is, how can I produce more oil or natural gas out of the field? Well, the business model goes beyond that. It goes to the effect of, well, how much money am I going to make, or will I make money by producing more oil and gas? Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you're very successful on the production side, but it costs you so much in order to do that you don't make money at the end, particularly lower oil prices, market challenges like there are today, and things like that. There's a lot of companies who are very successful at producing more oil and natural gas, but because of lack of pipelines, lack of market, lack of the high operating costs, et cetera, they end up losing money. And the business model is both. I mean, yes, you have an engineering challenge, but yes, you have an economic challenge.
Right.
And the goal is, you can't lose money by making more barrels. That's the wrong answer.
Right, sir. And if we talk about big data reshaping the industrial ecosystem, particularly with respect to an organization's ability to be the integrator and high-level analyzer of data, how do you think oil and gas companies should approach this scenario?
Well, one of the challenges for oil and gas is to break down the functional silos.
Right.
I've been at this digital oil field now for nearly 20 years, and I say that DOF 1.0, Digital Oil Field 1.0, was really about information intensity within functions. So the drillers got more data about drilling, the measurement while drilling units, the logging while drilling units, the directional drilling, all the rest of that. They got more data about drilling, and they got better at drilling wells, but they stopped there because we do have functional, departmental, organizational, cultural issues around integrating around the value chain.
Right.
So the drillers would have more data and drill a better well, but they didn't share that data with the completion engineers. And then the completion engineers got more data about their long laterals and hydraulic fracturing operations, but they didn't share that with the production people, who then had data about the production decline curve and their artificial lift and enhanced oil recovery techniques, but they didn't share that with anybody else. So Digital Oilfield 1.0 was about information intensity. Digital Oilfield 2.0 that we're in now, largely because this idea that we can connect things, to connect information. We have cloud computing, we have the Internet of Things devices, we can move data around, and we should be sharing it. So the challenge today in Digital Oilfield 2.0 is the integration of all the data we've got from these different phases, so we can see a bigger picture about the whole asset, all the way, it's economic impact we've talked about, it's, reservoir engineering impact, but also it's environmental impact and the infrastructure and the market, and seeing bigger and bigger pictures. You're talking about integration. That's the opportunity, is if you can see, it isn't the company with the most data that wins. It's a company who can see new insights into operations and operate better. And however you define better, whether it's economically, environmentally, safety, or whatever it is, it's the better decisions that wins.
Right. And so with more and more data being integrated into the system, how do you look at the threats of data privacy or cybersecurity in the industry value chain?
Well, those are important challenges, and they're ones that, again, unfortunately, the digital oilfield tends to tack on after. And anytime if you talk to cybersecurity people, if you try to add on security at the end, you're probably just plugging holes, and there's probably more holes than you can plug, and the bad guys can do things that you don't want them to do. So it's less of a problem about individual privacy than there might be in consumer or banking or other areas where somebody's personal information is involved. Here we're involved the personal information of the well and the personal information of the reservoir, and that's not something people are worried about too much. But we are worried about intellectual property. We may have a special proprietary way of hydraulic fracturing a well or putting the fluids in or something, and we don't want that exposed to competitors. That's not quite the same thing as individual information, but it's important.
Right.
The thing I'm most concerned about, and because it's happened, the oil and gas industry is a target of the cyber criminals, and that's actually getting in and changing equipment in the field, their operating practices. We've had the oil and gas companies in the Middle East that have been attacked and affected operations, even down to getting involved in SCADA or process control information and changing their parameters and causing accidents. The whole idea of, the good news is we're connected, and the bad news is we're connected, and we don't always know who's getting involved.
Right.
We've got smart equipment that we can send that can make their own minds up, essentially change the rules based on a better understanding of their conditions. But then at the same time, that means that people can send them false signals and operate in a different way. Security has to be an element of the digital oil field. The information intensity was there, the connectivity now is there, the processing on the edge now is there. With all of that stuff, you have to maintain a degree of a secure operations that all of this stuff doesn't get fooled with in a digital way. And most oil and gas companies say, well, they won't attack me. I'm not a bank. I'm not some famous celebrity or whatever. Why would they attack me? But the oil and gas industry is one of the top 5 areas that cybersecurity experts say are vulnerable to this kind of attack. So we have to be considering cybersecurity all along. And of course, companies always want to keep their secrets. So intellectual property protection is another element of that. I've used the term the 3 IPs. There is individual privacy, there's intellectual property, and then there's this information protection around the operation of critical equipment.
Right, 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 sir. And now, since we are talking about digitalization, oil and gas 4.0 is a central theme in 2020 and has been there for quite some time. According to you, which phase of digitalization is currently there for the oil and gas industry? Which phase are we in?
Well, that's kind of a good question, and there's no one answer because you will find leading practitioners that are much further advanced than maybe some of the laggards. So the industry really is in a lot of different places, and it doesn't move as one. It moves as different companies do different things. There are companies, particularly Norwegian operators, the Equinor, the state oil company. BP Aker, and is another one that have been at the forefront of this movement for digitalization for 20 years. I mean, so it's not new, and they've continued to make it an emphasis, and they move forward, and they move it forward a lot, even to remote operations of some of their offshore platforms with use of automation and robotics and different things. It's amazing. So but if you could also go in other places, and the oil field looks like just like it did in the 1970s when I graduated. I mean, it hasn't changed much at all. And so it's hard to answer your question because the industry is not in one place.
Right.
The best answer I could give your question is to quote a term from some researchers at MIT in the United States. They actually separate the term digitization from digital transformation.
Okay.
And the idea of digitization is, can you turn a lot of data that you have in the field digitally and then be able to manipulate it?
Mm-hmm.
In that, I think the industry's pretty far along on average.
Right.
Digital transformation, in their definitions, means, are you changing the way you work because you have all this data?
Mm-hmm.
Because you have these predictive models, because you have these advanced analytics and visualization techniques. So are you operating in a fundamentally different and better way?
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, I think the oil and gas industry has a long way to go. We've invested in the technology, but we found the organizational change hard.
Right, right. And so many industry leaders have mentioned, just as you said, that technology is the easy part. But when it comes to cultural change, organizational change, people, that is where the real challenge lies.
Technology is the hard part. Changing people's mind is the really hard part.
Absolutely, absolutely, sir. And now, sir, taking this conversation further, taking your points further, what are some of the digital trends that you would say we need to look out for in the present times?
Well, some of the trends that are, I think, easy to follow are some of the technology on the edge, which I mean in the oil field, that's in the oil field.
Mm-hmm.
You do have these Internet of Things devices, which allows us to measure more and more, and then to be able to send it wherever you want to send it through their cloud computing connections.
Right.
These pieces of equipment are getting smarter, the smart pump, the smart compressor, the smart wellhead.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're able to not only measure information and communicate it, you can actually process it and then through actuators do better things with it. So, the field automation setups are getting smarter, and they're getting more information. They're putting processing power on the edge. There's this whole concept now of edge computing that essentially, once you build your model, you don't have to have your model in your corporate headquarters. You can put the appropriate pieces of the model on the equipment and begin to have actions. Again, it's just the clock speed of making decisions. Now, all of a sudden, you can make decisions in seconds. And in the case of safety, you do not want the human being involved. You want,
right,
a safe shutdown operations in less than seconds, right, in order to try to stop accidents happen. And humans add a latency to that decision process that causes accidents. So some things you want to operate faster than the humans. So, and that's machine to machine.
right.
The challenge for me is, I don't think we pay enough attention to the data we're collecting. We we're all excited about the new statistical techniques to build models, but we don't go in and say, well, am I building a model with poor data? By not understanding that, I think we end up with bad models and no model is perfect. No, all models are wrong, but some are useful. We can build useful models if we understand the data that comes from the data quality. Are our data sets biased? I mean, there are techniques that have been around for a long time in statistics to understand the quality of data, but we tend to rush through that so quickly. We'll take whatever data we can find and we can build a fancy model from it. The model gives us predictions we think we've done, but often we haven't, because we haven't really taken that time, have a little bit of patience, have the understanding of the physical and the domain expertise to build good model or best possible models from the rest of that. So while this challenge, like security, is not the sexy part of the technology, it's a really important part of it.
Right, right. And sir, I'm just curious. I'm not sure if I'm asking the right question, but when we are talking about automation in the oil and gas industry, which are some of the areas where you feel that automation cannot beat human intelligence?
Not have the involvement in human beings.
Yes, yes. Which are those aspects in the industry where you feel that technology cannot match the human capabilities and human intelligence?
Well, that's a good one, because everyone asks, is technology going to replace human beings? And the answer for me is absolutely not. There are advantages of human beings, and that is, I'll call it pattern recognition. The machines beat the humans in data processing, hands down.
Right.
And the human being on kind of has limits in how much data I can get into my brain, and how fast I can process it, all the rest of that. But and so that's where I believe in a human machine partnership. Yes, automation will take certain jobs away from the oil field. In those cases, that's probably a good thing, because the robotics and the automation systems will keep human beings out of bad places and have many fewer accidents around that. So that's a good thing. But kind of looking back, well, so where is the human advantage? One, it's in recognizing how these systems work, in building the model in the first place. And then after that, it's in operating the model and recognizing certain circumstances that you haven't built into your machine learning part. If you haven't taught the algorithm how to recognize something, I mean, the classic example is the image processing on the internet of this is a cat and this is a dog, right? Well, you can train the algorithm to pick out a cat and pick out a dog, but then you throw a lion in there, and it's not gonna know what to do because you didn't train it, right?
Right.
Well, the human being kind of looks at that and said, well, that's not one of the two patterns I said. It's something else, and from other knowledge, it can help the algorithm out. The machine will do what you train it to do really fast and really well. But if something comes up that you didn't train it to do, it's going to get lost, or it's going to make a bad choice.
Right.
So building models, understanding exceptions, improving models in ways outside the domain that you built the models, that's where humans are really good. Our brains are great at pattern recognition, and applying experience even from outside the area. They're not great at processing lots of data fast, but that's why, I mean, I've begun to started using a tool like AI, artificial intelligence. I think we're getting to a point now where AI is not a tool. AI is a coworker. And even now, we've got Siri, we've got other things. Our interface into technologies is growing beyond the keyboard. Right. We can now talk to our AI through natural language processing. And, today we say, Siri, what time is it? Or Siri, can you play my favorite music track for me, or whatever. But I think it won't be very long before we're going to ask a natural language processing front end off of a digital twin, which is a model of our process. We're going to say, what was production yesterday? Where were the areas that we missed our forecast? Why did that pump go down? What is the next step around? And by doing that and having the AI do its thing, we're going to be able to get to the right questions and the right answers faster.
Absolutely, sir.
But that's a cultural change. I mean, talking to your technology seems a little weird to my generation of engineer.
Yes, yes, definitely. And now, sir, you are also advising companies and startups regarding the digital space in oil and gas. Tell us about Reflections Data Consulting, your organization. How is it simplifying energy?
Well, the main point of why I formed the firm I did after I retired
Mm-hmm.
was because I felt people weren't paying enough attention to data, and
Yes.
I found people in these companies that I work with, my clients, that agreed. And so building what they call a data foundation or a data strategy,
Mm-hmm.
to sustain that is where my focus has been. Everybody rushes to the algorithms and the Python programming and the artificial neural nets and all the rest of that. I understand that. I learned a little bit about it. I'm not a great programmer,
Mm-hmm.
but I can help people come back and understand data quality, data standards, how you have to manage data from its life cycle, how
Mm-hmm.
data doesn't always stay the same thing and it changes through the value chain. So the emphasis on the work that I've done as a consultant is to help companies develop a data foundation that helps them put a platform, your Dais, for their analytics that they will do later on.
Right.
But without that, you are building a lot of technology on a weak foundation,
Mm-hmm.
and it will likely fall apart.
Right, right. And so, talking about a strong data analytics strategy, what do you think are some of the key questions that oil and gas organizations must ask in order to simplify their processes?
Well, the lack of data standards is probably one of my number one. Unfortunately, this era where we've developed functional silos, we end up calling things differently.
Mm-hmm.
There's even this very simple question: what is a well? You ask that question of a driller, they'll tell you one thing, and all of the information they need to get. You ask a production, somebody else, a revenue accountant, something else, an exploration, something else. We don't even understand. We don't have a common vocabulary
Mm-hmm.
around a lot of the key information objects in the area. So lack of data standards is number one, which gets to the inability for us to share data because we're not talking about the same thing, or we're talking about the same thing using different terms.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is data quality. Do we really take the time to look at are we putting our best data forward into the models? Again, different ways we have dueling data in a sense because we have different versions of the truth. I've seen production engineers argue about production forecast, and it turns out one group took the data from a month ago and another group took the data from a week ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they used good models and good analytics, but they came up with different answers. And the challenge was they didn't start with the same data, and they didn't even think about that till 2 days later after they got tired of start arguing about it, the answer. So we don't tend to go back, and we don't lack of data standards leads to our problems in integration.
Mm-hmm.
Lack of data quality leads to our dueling versions of the truth, and this lack of sharing data. Because even within companies among things, but also but inside a company as well as outside a company within an area, if we would share data, we would have better models and we get better results.
Mm-hmm.
And even a bad answer, a blowout for one company, it really affects that company, but it affects the whole industry because it puts a black eye on our ability to operate safely.
Right, right, sir. And with data sharing, what are your thoughts on collaboration across the industry?
I once was quoted as saying collaboration is an unnatural act. I mean, we do have a tendency to hug our data too close and to call everything private and proprietary and not share enough. So in working in a big company, we didn't even collaborate that well inside the company. But between companies was even harder. I think there is a real advantage in sharing data and collaborating in most state ways. Yes, I understand there's certain things, reserve estimations and the rest of that, that are proprietary data and should be kept that way. I'm not saying share everything,
Mm-hmm.
but basic data and all the rest of it, I think it will help improve the whole industry by doing more of that. We're not very good at sharing data. We are collaborative as individuals. We are not collaborative as companies.
Companies. Absolutely. And now, sir, how are you looking at the COVID-19 situation and its impact on the industry?
Well, it's had a serious and significant impact in several different ways. Obviously, the operations, the health and safety of the people in the companies is number one. And yes, have been some COVID outbreaks on offshore platforms and fabrication yards and things like that. So, number one, you have to there's an impact on the employees, and that you have to keep them safe. Number two, it's what it's done to the demand for fossil fuels. I mean, we had nearly a 30% reduction in demand in 3 months. You know, when in normal markets, if you had a reduction of 1 or 2%, it would have, done all kinds of crazy things to prices. But 30% is unheard of. We've never been here before.
Right.
And because of that, we have too much supply for too little demand, and that crashed the oil prices.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there's been a lot of operators from OPEC plus Russia to operators around the world that have cut back production because of economic drivers. Mm-hmm. And there has been some recovery in demand as maybe the first wave of the pandemic has passed some countries, not every place. Okay. So that gap between supply and demand has narrowed a lot, but it is still at the place where it's going to keep prices low for a while, maybe well into next year. And maybe we're not going to get $100 oil prices, U.S. dollar oil prices for maybe again, I don't know. I'm of the mindset that companies need to prepare for low to moderate oil prices forever. And if they get higher, then they make more money. That's good news. But they have to prepare to do that, which means efficiency, productivity. You can't allow yourself to have an accident, because then you'll lose your license to operate. So safety and environment is increasingly important. I'm working on a project at the School of Mines now of actually trying to monitor and manage methane emissions from oil and gas. Mm-hmm. And you could do that. And it might be electrification of your site instead of diesel engines. It might be extra monitoring with your SCADA systems, because you really need to monitor air quality. Mm-hmm. It might be more automation to take more human beings out of the field.
Right.
Excuse me. In order to do all of the rest of that. But there are some companies that is their goal already. Mm-hmm. A new shale company, relatively new shale company called Parsley Energy out of Texas. Right. Their new CEO has come out and talked about a new shale deal. And there's a lot of companies, particularly the European majors, have come out and talked about their own operational goals in reducing methane emissions. So the whole idea of bringing environment into the whole kind of issue. Safety's always been there. Mm-hmm. Profitability has been there, except sometimes we've over-focused on volumes rather than profits. Right. And not worried about the whole market, but we have to. And now environment is an equal, mm-hmm. Driver in all this.
Right. And with this situation, how do you see the role of data and digital going forward in the industry?
Well, data is going to give us our idea of what's going on. I mean, good data drives good models drive more accurate forecasts and simulations, the models for smarter equipment, the models for the automation of the field. So essentially, I think data is the fuel. Mm-hmm. We talked about hydrocarbons as a as a fuel. We need to think of it, data as a fuel for this whole digital twin side of our business. And with that, we know good fuel drives cleaner engines. Good fuel is going to drive smarter operations. And that data, which now is relatively easy and inexpensive to collect. So I use the term, we are data rich and information poor. We have a lot. When I was in the early industry, I mean, we didn't have all that much data. So interpretation and production became an art form, right? We had to kind of guess what was happening. But now we have so much data, we can predict more accurately what is happening if we can connect the variety of data and build better models from it.
Absolutely, sir. And now talking about your journey in the industry, 37 years with Chevron and over 6 years at the university, what have been some of the most memorable experiences in your journey, and what are some of those key insights that you would like to share with our young professionals and students who are aspiring a career in the industry?
That's I named my company Reflections Data because it was reflections of an old guy looking over a long career. So that your question is appropriate. Number one is never stop learning. I mean, that I go to university now and I class, and I'm probably the worst coder of the class. I mean, the 18, 19-year-old students could code circles around me. And new technology is happening, so fast. And it's coming from mostly outside the industry. I mean, it used to be we had our own research facilities, and most of the technology we used, the industry developed itself, for itself. Now, the digital technologies are really being developed, whether it's Silicon Valley or other places, it's being developed for all industries. And the problem is adapting, not inventing. So first lesson is never stop learning. You have to be a lifelong learner. It's like the shark in the water. If he stops swimming, he stops breathing, right?
Right.
For the engineer in this industry, when you stop learning, you start digressing, and you should probably think about getting out. So a wise man knows what he doesn't know, and which means he's always trying to keep learning.
Right.
You run into someone who thinks they know it all, then walk away from that person because they're wrong. So never stop learning. Be adaptable. In my career, I went from geophysics to information technology to this new thing that got invented called the digital oil field. And I was fortunate enough to have the same company paycheck, but I really had 3 or 4 different careers, and I visited a number of places and worked in a number of places. So you have to be flexible. You have to move with where the opportunities are. Don't be afraid to take a challenge. There'll be some down times like there is now,
Okay.
and where you're going to have to take maybe less than what your dream was. But then there'll be better times, and to position yourself for advantage.
Okay.
I think the third and last thing is you own your own career. Sometimes you work for a big company and say, well, they're going to take care of me. They're going to get me my next job. They're going to, take care of my pension and all the rest of that. Well, it's too volatile these days. I mean, you own your own career. You need to go where you want to go with passion and obviously economic realities. You got to pay the bills still. But if you go to work every day saying, I want to do this. This is what I want to do, and maybe next year you want to do something else. But you own your career. Never stop learning, and be flexible with the opportunities.
That's a very empowering message, sir. And for the class of 2020, what would you say? Because they are anxious, they're nervous, they're confused whether this is the right time to enter into the industry. Things have changed dramatically, and they are not in a position to take their decision properly. What would be your message for them?
Well, I think, it's a tough one, and I've I had students in my class who had a job offer and then it was rescinded, or had a job an offer for a summer internship and then the company took it away. And they are asking exactly that question that you asked. I just have to say, you got to essentially tough it out. I mean, this unfortunately every commodity-based industry, from mining, fossil fuels, a lot of other things, you have ups and downs. When the supply and demand get out of balance, the prices go down, and companies have to react the way they are.
Right.
One piece of historical advice is it's happened before. This is about my fifth different cycle going through this over my career, where these sort of situations have happened. Everyone a little bit different, but everyone kind of fundamentally the same. And to that, you have to essentially be flexible. If that means more education, if that means taking another kind of job, that I guess one of the things, if you're a digital engineer, maybe a digital petroleum engineer, you have those digital skills that there opens up different sorts of jobs. Mm-hmm. If you're an engineer, that's something that opens up different sorts of jobs other than oil and gas.
Right.
So you may have to take something that you didn't think was a great opportunity in order to be prepared and then be able to jump back in what you really want to do when the market is better. Mm-hmm. So now is the time to, I guess, you have to think long term in terms of where you want your career to go, but you also have to be flexible in short-term decisions, to get by. Now's the time for resilience. Now's the time for networking like crazy. Now's the time even for learning some new skills, whether it's going back and getting another degree, or whether it's taking an online course in Python programming, or whatever it is. I mean, add to your CV, and to get stronger when times get better.
Absolutely, sir. And sir, what would you say about communicating the right story about the industry? In one of your articles, you discussed this issue, why it is important to tell the right story, because there's a negative perception in the minds of Generation Z. How do we change that?
Well, I think, and one of the things that's really powerful is the voice of the younger employee and all the rest of this. I mean, everyone expects the politicians and the lobbyists and the rest of that to say what they're going to say, and that really doesn't change too many people's minds. But if there's a young petroleum engineer who really sees the advantages as well as some of the consequences of operations, and they they can talk to their neighbors and their friends about the oil industry isn't that bad. The oil industry tries to be safe. The oil industry works hard at being an environmental steward. The oil industry tries to provide the energy to pull people out of poverty and make, so many of the petrochemicals that make so much of what we have to live. I mean, the good things that the industry does don't get told. Mm-hmm. And the most powerful storytellers are your friends and your neighbors who say, you're wrong. I mean, that politician over there is saying that because, they want to get elected or whatever. But the real story is that, yes, the industry has to own up to the consequences of its poor safety practices and places. They have to own up to the consequences of their environmental implications. The industry has to get better, and it's trying to get better.
Yes, yes.
But at the same time, the industry provides, essentially the energy that has lifted 1 billion plus people out of poverty. And there's another billion or so that don't have reliable electricity. And those people can't get forgotten by saying, well, just move to solar power. Well, yes, I'm a believer in all of the above. Renewable energies are a great source. There are places, because of advancement, they're the right way to produce your electricity. But they're not going to do everything. They're not going to fly a plane. They're not going to produce petrochemicals. There are many other uses of fossil fuels that are going to be very important for the world. Right. And I think, when you look at the big picture, it's almost elitist to say, well, only green power, because that's going to leave billions of people out of the picture.
Right, sir. Very true. And for the younger generation, if they want to pursue a career as a data scientist, how would you explain the role of a data scientist in the industry to them? And how do you see the importance of this role increasing across the industry?
Well, and here I'm going to use two different terms. I'm going to use your data science term, and I'm going to use the term digital engineer. What I'm doing in my class is not creating data scientists. That a data scientist is a PhD in math, statistics, or operations research, and they are the absolute kings and queens of developing these algorithms.
Right.
The digital engineer understands where the data comes from, what the use is. Often or not, they are the storyteller, even to the data science people, about what problem they're trying to solve. The data scientists often just go in and build a model. They have tremendous capabilities for correlation, building on their artificial intelligence models, but they don't really know, or sometimes don't even care what problem they're solving. Right. So, is there a growing role for data scientists? Yes, but not to run the oil companies, because it is to create more and more sophisticated models from more and more different kinds of data. But the digital engineer is there to solve the problem, to understand the problem, to help build, understand the models when they're working, to use the models, to tell the story, what the value is from all the rest of that. So most companies, successful ones using analytics, do it with a team of a data scientist, several digital engineers who understand the domain, and then people that know how to manage and manipulate the data. Very rarely is all three of those skills in one person, but it's the team that can do that. And usually it's the digital engineer who's the manager of that team and the chief storyteller.
Right. So that really helps in understanding the concept of who a data scientist is actually in the industry.
This is a quick example here. In my class, I have one class was dedicated, a computer lab, where I bring in a computer scientist to talk about Python programming. I have two classes where I bring in a professor of statistics in order to go through the idea of statistical analysis. I don't try to teach that. That's not my skill set. Right. But then I weave it together with drilling and production and reservoir management in order to how to apply. That is modeling, I think, that team approach where I think companies have to have.
And now, sir, talking about the trying times we are in at the moment, what is your message for the startups in the oil and gas industry currently, and also the executives, the managers at this point of time? Startups are, particularly the startups, are going through a very, very tough time. Some of the startups are really suffering because they were about to pick up and the scenario completely shifted against their favor. How would you help them get through this crisis?
Well, you're right again about the challenging for them. Well, I think for the message to the startups is learn how to understand the value that their technology drives. And when they're out trying to get investors or customers or whatever, don't talk about how cool your technology is. Talk about what problems it solves.
Right.
And in that, I mean, again, startups are like anybody else. They're really in love with their technology, and they work very hard, and they're really, really proud of it. And they have a hard time believing that other people won't fall in love with their technology too. So most of their stories is all about how good their technology is. Well, in these times with clients with smaller budgets, with more focused in priorities, they don't care. They don't care how good your technology is. If it can't help them solve the problems they have right in front of them, they're not going to buy, and they're not going to listen to you. So I think it now adds another burden on the startups, which is hard. But they have to understand the industry problems and know how their technology can help better solve those problems, be it operating at a lower cost or getting more oil out of the ground or whatever. So that for the startup needs to figure out how to change their story to being a problem solver, not just a technology developer.
Absolutely, sir. And now we have arrived at the end of the conversation. I would like to understand from you, how do you look back on your such a unique and eventful journey in the industry? And what are some of the new milestones that you are looking forward to?
Well, I have been very fortunate. I mean, my varied career is gave me a kind of a perspective that's unique. I'm not smarter than anybody else, but I have been able to integrate a lot of pieces together, and with the emphasis of telling stories, I think that's been an important part of it. Um, I guess one of my milestones, at least my wife would say, is one of these days I'd like to actually retire. I don't do a very good job at retiring. I keep doing other things, and so one of these days I'm going to slow down and take it easy and go in the mountains more. But no, I keep getting reinvented with the students that I have. I once wrote an article that says, why is it that being with students make you feel younger and being with industry professionals make you feel older? It's their view, their opportunities, their perspectives, that by seeing that can help me make me just a little bit younger. And that's an energy source for me. That new technology, the opportunities to talk to new people, such as yourself, I said I appreciate these kind of opportunities. But for me, right now, it's just trying to keep going, trying to keep adding value to bright young minds, help to get the industry to recognize that this generation of digital engineers have a lot to offer.
Absolutely, sir. It's been wonderful talking to you today. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing your beautiful story with me. You have actually helped me understand so many various complex, concepts in the industry. You have simplified the dialogue, not just for me, but also for our audience today. And I'm really grateful that you were able to take out some time for this conversation today. And I am really thankful to you for joining me today. Thank you so
You're
much.
very welcome. Very welcome.
Thank you, sir.